We've got a betting line for Oregon hosting Washington, and boy, Dan Lanning's got to win that one.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why, if you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Plenty to get to today. Dakorien Moore is the most exciting prospect since. I'll answer that question. Might not be what you think. And will Oregon have a quarterback advantage in all 12 games this year? That's all coming up and more on today's show. But our friends over at FanDuel have been releasing more and more information about how they view college football teams this year and what they think matchups should look like and how they might play out. And Oregon is a whopping 19.5 point favorite at home against Washington on November 30th. That line can certainly change, frankly, in either direction between now and then. I expected Oregon to be a sizable favorite there. I did not expect it to be 19.5 points. I know Washington has undergone a lot of turnover, but the importance of winning that game for Dan Lanning, you can readily make the case that it's the most important game to the fans on the schedule because of where Washington is at. They've got a new coach in year one who's brought in enough transfer portal talent to kind of give them a stable season. They should be a bowl team, but they shouldn't be anything more than just kind of an okay, middle-of-the-road Big Ten team this year. Meanwhile, Oregon has got all this recruiting momentum. They've had a great transfer portal class. They've got a transfer quarterback. Lanning's in his third year at the helm. That's a game that he's just got to win. And boy, Vegas feels incredibly confident. I mean, incredibly confident that Oregon is going to win that game. Now, I too am supremely confident to the tune of a money line of minus 1,100. Gosh almighty, I don't know about that one. There's just something about Washington right now that I think is in Oregon's or in the heads of Oregon fans, rightfully so, because it's been 3 straight 3-point losses. This is a game where if Oregon plays to their fullest potential, they can beat Washington really badly. I think the biggest reason that this line is so big, I would have expected kind of closer to 11 or 12. And the reason that I think Vegas has got this line that much higher is the battle in the trenches. So last year, Oregon improved its defensive line from 2022 dramatically. They still couldn't get a lot of pressure on Michael Penix. Why? Because he had the best offensive line in college football that won the Joe Moore Award. Their offensive line this year is going to be incredibly patchwork. It is going to be wildly, wildly different. And that is going to play into Oregon's strength on the defensive side of the ball, which will be the line of scrimmage, because I think this Oregon defensive line is the best we have seen in Eugene since 2014, when you had not one, but 2 top 10 picks in the NFL draft. Does this line have that? Probably not. We don't have DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead, but the overall depth, I think there were better high-end players on that 2014 unit that, of course, helped propel Oregon to a national championship game appearance. But the depth on this team, I think, is stronger. If you were to go down and compare the, roughly, 4, 5, like 9 guys along the defensive line that played, you probably have a better overall depth of talent and production on this year's unit than that one. But do you have NFL draft picks that are going to go inside the top 10? No, probably not. Jordan Birch will get drafted somewhere, I'd imagine. So will Derek Harmon, the Michigan State transfer. Jamari Caldwell could. Any of the edge guys who I've talked about, not sure about Amarion Winston. He kind of feels a little bit more like just a solid college edge player, but maybe he pops compared to the trio of true sophomores that they've got this year with Mateo and Blake Purchase and Tatum Tuioti. So I love the defensive line. I think that's where Oregon can build a big advantage in this game. And defensively, Washington has brought in a lot of players in the transfer portal. Last I had checked, they had a top 10, 15 transfer portal class, depending on which site you look at. They've brought over some players from Arizona. They're not all going to play this year, but most of the impact guys they brought over are on the offensive side of the ball. They brought in some players along on the defensive side. They got a safety from Sacramento State who's a good player. Ephesians Pryzok from Arizona is a good corner. I don't think they have the depth or the weapons, and I don't think they have the defensive line play either to match up with what Oregon brings in the trenches. Another line that I think reflects this is Oregon or is Washington hosting Michigan. That line opened at 11.5. The game's in Seattle. I thought that was too high. It's come down to 8.5, 9.5. I think it's gone back and forth once or twice there. And again, the reason is Michigan's strength this year is going to be their defensive line, which I think can overwhelm Washington's offensive line, but also Michigan's offensive line. I think they've just got a great culture, and that'll be a good unit. So the trenches is where Oregon can build a big advantage here, but all these reasons line up to create a sort of no pressure scenario for Washington. They're on the road, year one, Oregon's rolling. Oregon should win this game. The last time, though, Oregon got what was a betting favorite of this size in a game against a team that you thought might be a little closer that I remember was Colorado. If the game looks something like that, that'll do a lot for Oregon fans. Like no matter what happens in the previous 11 games, even if Oregon has lost 3 games by that point and they won't make the playoff for the Big Ten championship game, I think Lanning can win over a lot of fans even more if he covers that spread. If that's something that Oregon goes on to attain this year, I think Dan Lanning can just kind of ease the minds of Oregon fans. Like, hey, this isn't going to be one of those things where you just don't beat a rival for an extended period of time, right? Like, this isn't going to just drag on. And I do not expect it to in any way, shape, or form. Oregon's got the advantage on paper. They've only lost once at home under Dan Lanning. I do not anticipate that changing this year. Ohio State certainly could. Ohio State is still a very, very slight favorite at Autzen Stadium, 1.5 points. I mean, that's just going to be a fantastic football game. That's the biggest one. But I think you can readily make the case, maybe not for all Oregon fans, but there is a subset. There is a subset. I interact with a lot of you out there that will look at this game and say, for goodness sake, you got to win that one. And going into last year, that's kind of what the story was, because he went 0-2 against Washington and Oregon State in his first season at the helm, and a lot of Oregon fans felt like, wait a minute, look, losing to one, I mean, that happens from time, but losing to both? You lost to both in heartbreaking oh, goodness. So coming into 2023, I think this game could look a lot like the Oregon State game from a season ago, where you had the heartbreaking loss in the previous year against that opponent. Now, granted, you've got a different team, different coaching staff and such. They're going to come in, and they'll be good. But at home, I think a statement is going to get made. I don't think it was an accident that against Oregon State this past year, the Ducks ran the ball and had like a 9-minute drive to go down the field and score a touchdown. And that the final score of that game was 31-7. That feels like the sort of statement Oregon is poised to make for that regular season finale against Washington. And that line reflects the confidence that I think a lot of people, myself included, have in Oregon and what they can be this year. I feel like that's discounting Washington a little, because I think they've got some they have a more than capable offensive skill positions. They might get overwhelmed on the offensive line. That is 100% possible. And if Oregon gets going there, then it's game over, and they could win the game 38-10. But overall, I was a little surprised, but it kind of made me go, they did that against Colorado too, and that game went pretty well. Drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter at @McLaughlinCFB. So, Dakorien Moore, big commitment. I've talked about him recently here on the show. Just how big of a commitment is he? Who was the last recruit that I was this excited about or high on? That's coming up next. First, let's talk about Game Time, an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, their lowest price guarantee. Game Time just takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. You can save up to 60%. That's over half. Buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you're looking for. You get a panoramic view of your seat before you arrive, so you know exactly what to expect. Take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. That's the first step. Create an account. Next step. And then use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets. Lowest price guaranteed. We're rolling. Show is just rolling along. I didn't need a second segment, Sip. I'm just kidding. Of course I needed it. All right, let's go into the mailbag here. YouTube comments or X, formerly known as Twitter. If you want priority access and a bunch of other perks as well, go join the flock over at Subtext. Link in the description below wherever you listen to or watch this show. Free 14-day trial. Then it's just $5 a month if you like it. A question came in over there, and that question is up first because priority access. I got a great mailbag question. I love the confidence there. Like, this is a great question. And by the way, it is. Who is the last player recruited before Kayvon that gave you the excitement as Dakorien? Well, you narrowed the window down to before Kayvon Thibodeaux because Thibodeaux certainly had that sort of hype. I'll mention who I want to put in this class in a moment, but I'll accept the premise of your question and say, okay, before Kayvon Thibodeaux, who was this hyped? DeAnthony Thomas. DeAnthony Thomas is the answer. A guy who looks on film as a 5-star and is incredibly highly rated and is deserving of that ranking and just looks different. When you watch Dakorien Moore play football, there's nothing about his game that I have questions about. I feel as if watching him, I know exactly what sort of college football player he's capable of becoming and what sort of player he will become with the Ducks because his athleticism and just overall feel for the game combined with his versatility, I think like Gary Bryant Jr., he could play inside or outside and excel at both. You know, he's only 5'11", so too is Evan Stewart, who's probably Oregon's starting X receiver this year. I think you can put him out there, but if you want to line him up in the slot, I think you can do that too. And with the way that he runs after the catch, I see no reason you can't get him involved in jet sweeps or pop passes or gimmick plays or swing screens, anything like that. Now, he's not going to be a hybrid running back the way that DeAnthony Thomas was. I just think the similarities between the two athletically, recruiting-wise, the impact. I mean, USC wanted DeAnthony Thomas really, really bad. I'm pretty sure in 2012, I could have this wrong. Someone could correct me, but if I am remembering correctly, I think he heard some boos when he came out onto the field in Los Angeles as a true freshman because that's a guy that was supposed to go to USC, and lo and behold, he did not. And so, you know, he went down there to play the Coliseum only in 2012 because he was with Oregon 11, 12, and 13. But, you know, that was the last guy that I remember having that sort of excitement level to where I looked and, you know, watched his highlights and said, oh, yeah, he's making an impact as a true freshman. So offensively, I think that is the answer. Now, Thibodeaux, of course, was the number one overall player in the class, and that in and of itself. And that was during a time, 2019, he would have committed 18. I was in college, so I was following recruiting a little bit, but it wasn't part of my job yet. I was, you know, figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. Lo and behold, here I am. And Thibodeaux certainly, you know, number one overall player, picks Oregon. That was pretty shocking in the best way of just like, wait, Oregon got we got the number one player in the class. The best guy. He's not going to Bama. He's not going to LSU. He's not going to where. He's not going to Georgia. He's going here. Like, oh, that's cool. And he definitely lived up to the hype in every sense of the term. But the last player that got me this excited with his film and recruiting profile mixed together was Justin Flo. And that's a name I think all Oregon fans are aware did not work out, has not worked out. And he's a Division I college football player. You know, he hasn't fallen completely off the reservation. But is he the sort of guy that he looked like he'd be on film? Absolutely not. Now, part of it was it never seemed like he had a grasping of the college defense and what his assignments actually were. That was part of the reason he didn't make the jump. And I don't think that that's quite as important as a receiver. It matters. Don't get me wrong. It matters. Is it as important for a receiver as a linebacker? No, because you got to know what route you're running, whereas as a linebacker, you have to understand your coverage assignments and blitzing responsibilities, right? If defense shows RPO, are you sitting back? Do you come up? Do you blitz? Do you go here? If they motion here, like it's a lot more complicated to be on that side of the ball and understand everything that goes into making a play. So when I watched Justin Flowe's highlight film, that dude was a freak. I mean, that to this day might be the craziest highlight film I've ever seen. And on paper there, or on tape, he looked like a can't miss prospect. But it was a whiff. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was a whiff. Part of the reason, though, I think he never hit his full potential, the injury factor. And just like every other player, Dakorien Moore has to stay away from that. And I hope that the injury bug doesn't nag Jurion Dickey, because Jurion Dickey is a guy who I'd also put in this same sort of vein. I don't think, Dickey is crazy talented. Does his film pop? Yes. Does it pop the same way as Justin Flowe or Dakorien or Thibodeau? No, not quite. I think he's just kind of a step below, but certainly he's really, really good. I hope we don't look back one day and say, yeah, Jurion Dickey is a career of what could have been, because of the injury component that just kept biting him in the leg. And if Dakorien Moore stays healthy, I have no doubt that he's an impact guy in year one, an all-conference guy in year two, and an NFL draft pick after his third year, and could put up at least one, maybe more, probably more, 1,000-yard seasons as an Oregon wideout. So, not every big-time recruit works out. I feel far more confident in saying that Justin Flowe had more things working against him than Dakorien Moore does. But, since you narrowed the window a little bit from a recruiting standpoint, yeah, I'd say that DeAnthony Thomas was the last guy who popped this much to me, or who I had this high of expectations for, because of what he brings to the table athletically and the position he plays. Because there were other big-time recruits. I mean, Thomas Tyner, I think, would be close. Royce Freeman was a big-time recruit, and those two guys both lived up to the hype. But Dakorien Moore, yeah, I'd put him in that DeAnthony Thomas, Justin Flowe sort of category, not just because of his ranking, but because of what he looks like on film and how he projects to play at the next level. Speaking of this particular subject, this question came in from Rick. Mailbag question. I've seen an unreal, in all caps, amount of hate towards the Ducks these last few days since Moore committed. Did the Ducks just become public enemy number one with the so-called blue blood fan bases? Well, they're certainly not immensely popular on Twitter, because it turns out that Texas wanted this guy. I have a buddy who's a Texas fan. He says that he's been invested in this recruitment for like a year and a half. Texas fans are legitimately disappointed that they are not going to watch this guy play, because they've known about him for a long, long time, even longer than any of us, right? Once he decommitted from Oregon or from LSU, and then Rashad Samples gets hired, that's when everything kind of started to click together. But I think that it's a very natural reaction to see online nowadays. I don't know how pervasive that necessarily is throughout the entire fan base, because online representations or actions can be indicative of a subset of a fan base, not necessarily the entirety. I do see the narrative pop up a lot from media figures or people that cover other schools or fans or all sorts of folks that, Oregon is they're just throwing bags at people. It's just all NIL. And I have two reactions to that. Number one, that's legal. So I'm sorry your collective is not as invested or well-funded as Oregon's, but step up your... Oregon does not have the number one NIL... what's the word I'm looking for? I just sometimes you get on a roll and you just blank. Collective. Oregon does not have the number one NIL collective in all of college football. They have one of the 10 best, no doubt. You can look at a bunch of different metrics or rankings or wherever, but it's not number one. And so to pretend that the only reason Oregon is getting recruits through the legal mechanism of NIL is A, not accurate, and B, not illegal. And number two, I go back to Kayvon Thibodeau. For fans just get upset when a guy chooses a school that isn't theirs. That's the way it goes. That's the way it is. And you can't get rid of that. You can't remove that from the sport. It's just what the online world is. Like Twitter is all about, complaining, or YouTube comments as well. People just go in there and love to complain all the time. Yeah, let them complain. I wouldn't worry about it. And no, I don't think they're public enemy number one. I just think it's an easy target, right? The Phil Knight, Nike, Oregon connection, it makes Oregon an easy target, so it sounds really clear, and that's why it gets so much play online, because it sounds easy and it feels good. And it's a better explanation than Oregon out-recruited my school. Well, they just paid more for him, which, by the way, is, of course, part of recruiting nowadays. So, love the question. Got another mailbag question before we get to some quarterback talk, because I was thinking about whether Oregon has a quarterback advantage in all 12 games this year. They could. So this question came in from 5 a.m. This was a little bit of an older one in the mailbag. Appreciate your patience as always. Again, YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter, or if you want priority access, subtext, go join the flock and get your questions answered right here on the show. What's up, Spence? Been an everyday reviewer for a while, and although I frequently comment on posts, I've never asked a question. Your first question. I love it. So I thought I'd pick your brain for a sec. I got time. Recently, Josh Pate had a segment on Dan Lanning and Kirby Smart being comparable with the beginning of their careers and the similar path Dan is taking. Although that caught a lot of flack from SEC casuals, I think he brought up good points. What's your thoughts on that topic? Thanks, and go Ducks. So, the defensive coordinator background, coming from the best program in the country at the time, that connection's there, recruiting at a high level, elevating the base, getting fans excited, and also remaining committed to the institution in which you're now the head coach, and it's the first head coaching opportunity for either guy. So yeah, a lot of things line up there. No doubt about it. The difference is that Lanning has not yet had a season as bad as Kirby Smart's first season. I don't know where you thought I was going with that take, tone-wise. Yes, I think Dan Lanning can win a national championship at Oregon. No, I cannot guarantee you that it will be this year or next year or the year after that or the year after that. Kirby Smart was hired back in 2016 at Georgia. He has been there for a hot second. 2016, you know what his record was? 8-5. 8-5. They won the Liberty Bowl. He had a 7-5 regular season, and since then he has won at least 11 games in every regular season. Is Dan Lanning about to accomplish that? We got to see how this first year goes in the Big Ten, I think, before we can feel confident that Lanning is just going to rattle off 11 to 12 win seasons every year. I mean, that's the highest of high standards. Kirby Smart is the best coach running the best program in college football right now. Is Dan Lanning ascending to that level? He could be. He could be. It takes time, though. It takes a minute, a long minute. Jim Harbaugh was hired in 2016 at Michigan. Took him a while to win a national championship. So I think the early comparisons are incredibly logical. I'm not ready to go full-throated, he's the next Kirby Smart. He's going to do this and win 2 national championships in a row and could have won a third if not for one other guy. Like, it's still too early. It's still too early because Lanning has to keep getting better as a coach. We saw him improve from year 1 to year 2. What does he do from year 2 to year 3? Because last year he got outcoached twice. And those were Oregon's only losses. Well, what if he just keeps getting better as a head coach and is outcoached only 1 time a year or 0 times a year? Well, then you could see Oregon start rattling off 11, 12 win seasons every single year. But you also have to keep recruiting at a high level. You got to be able to keep coaches around. You got to make good hires too. And Kirby Smart has certainly found that with, Lanning coming over to Oregon. When you're a great program, you're going to have assistant coaches leave, and you have to be able to replace those guys. Nick Saban had this at Alabama, and that's just the nature of the beast. Dabo Swinney at Clemson eventually lost his offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator and had to make hires. He kept guys around over there at Clemson longer than most guys are able to when you win at that sort of level. So I think the early signs on Lanning are incredibly good. Right now, Kirby Smart is on the precipice of building the next dynasty in college football. And we can't say that Oregon can get there. Well, we can say Oregon can get there. I'm not going to put my foot down and say Oregon will get there. They're going to do that because I don't think that'd be very honest or good sports talk for all of you out there, which is not what I aim to deliver, or I do aim to deliver honest and good sports talk the best way I can. But I don't think I'd be being honest if I said, yeah, no, he's going to do that. Yeah, no, it's 100% a lock. He's got the early indicators, but he's only a couple steps along the path. It's a long drive. When I went to my first job from the Bay Area in college to Eastern Oklahoma State, there were a number of steps I had to take along the way. I didn't do it in one drive. I drove to here, then I drove to here. Well, Lanning has driven here, and he's gotten partially along the way to there. Kirby's just got a head start, so he's further down that path. So I hope I answered that question correctly. Love the early indicators, but Kirby Smart, it's really hard to compare yourself and can be dangerous, quite frankly, for fans to compare their head coach to the best in the entire sport. Because then if you're not at that level, you could look at your coach and say, well, he's not any good. Well, he's not good enough at this. I mean, I have a buddy who's a Michigan fan who wanted Jim Harbaugh fired for years. And I looked at him and I said, you're ridiculous. And he just won a national championship. He had to take that one back. All right, let's close with some quarterback talk here today. So I was thinking about Oregon's schedule and the quarterbacks that they're going to face this year. And there is a real possibility that Dillon Gabriel, though I don't think he's as good as Bo Nix, is better than every quarterback Oregon is going to face this year. I don't know of a quarterback in 2024 who I would rather have on Oregon's schedule. So let's just go down the list. Idaho, it doesn't matter who their quarterback is. It's an FCS team. Boise State, Malachi Nelson, former 5-star recruit. I've seen him throw the football live. He can spin it. He also hasn't started a game in college football yet. Hard to take him over Dillon Gabriel. Aiden Childs, oh, wait, that comes later. Sorry, Oregon State fans. That was an unnecessary and, frankly, somewhat accidental jab. But they're going to have either Jabari Johnson or Giovanni McCoy, an Idaho transfer or a Missouri transfer. Not taking either one of those guys over Dillon Gabriel. So the non-conference, yeah, that's easy. Ethan Garber's at UCLA. Taking Dillon Gabriel. Now it's time for Aiden Childs at Michigan State. I think one day you could talk me into Childs becomes a quarterback who at his peak, I might take over Dillon Gabriel. I don't know that time is now. He has not started a full season of college football. Gabriel has done that for several and has done so successfully at UCF and Oklahoma. So, yeah, Childs right now, that's a guy who maybe if he pops and everything comes together this year, he is bigger than Gabriel, has got a little bit more mobility, and has got a bigger arm as well. So, yeah, more upside. But right now, no, I don't think so. Ohio State, Will Howard, I'll take Gabriel. Purdue, Hudson Card, I'll take Gabriel again. Illinois, Luke Altmaier I don't think he's completed 60% of his passes in a season. He certainly hasn't hit almost 70 as Gabriel did a season ago. Michigan doesn't know who they're starting at quarterback. Neither does Maryland. Yeah, Maryland comes to Eugene this year because, realignment and everything makes sense. Wisconsin, Tyler Van Dyke. Look, this is kind of like the Aiden Childs debate. The overall upside because of physical traits might be greater. But right now, is he that sort of player? I think he's in a better offensive situation with Luke Fickell and Wisconsin than what he had with Mario Cristobal a year ago at Miami. And certainly Oregon fans understand why I would make that sort of statement. I need not expand upon it. But right now, no, I'm going with Gabriel. And then Washington. I mean, Washington has got an underrated quarterback, I think, in Will Rogers, who was a quarterback for a couple of years under Mike Leach, the late Mike Leach, R.I.P., at Mississippi State. And he's played a lot of football. He, like Dillon Gabriel, has played a lot of football. He and Will Howard are probably the quarterbacks closest to where Gabriel is at in terms of, I think if you shuffled them around, you would get similar results everywhere. Like if you took Will Rogers and put him on Oregon's team this year, would I feel as good about Oregon? Yeah, I'd feel pretty similar. But do I feel great? Like, which of the two would I rather have? Who's got better numbers? Gabriel's also got the mobility factor I think puts him over the top here for me. It's not every day, including last season, by the way, that you can look at Oregon's schedule and I can confidently say, yeah, they're going to have a quarterback advantage in all 12 games that they play. This might be an ongoing topic of discussion here on the show, So let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments, or shoot me a note on Twitter or over at Subtext. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.